Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's call with Congressman Adam Smith. During today's event, we'll be taking questions from constituents like you. So to ask a question, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad. And at any time during this call, you can sign up for the Congressman's newsletter by pressing star 6. Again, please press star 3 to ask a question and star 6 to subscribe to the newsletter. And with that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Smith. Congressman, the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks for everybody for joining. I know Christmas is not that far away, but there's a lot going on as we wrapped up the year back in Congress and here locally as well. So I wanted to make sure I gave a little bit of an update and then took questions, comments, whatever issues you want to raise. First and foremost around here, as you know, the flooding has been a major issue. The rain and the snow melt has caused significant challenges throughout the state, including in the 9th District in the Kent Valley with the White River, Cedar River, Green River, all reaching flood stage and evacuation notices going in for a number of cities. We're still dealing with that. There are still evacuation notices for Pacific mainly, but also some stuff in Kent, Auburn, and Tukwila. The good news is the state has responded quickly. There are funds available to help people getting rid of debris, temporary shelter, rebuilding. And then also we moved very quickly on the federal level to get FEMA approval, which was approved by the executive branch. So they have been cooperating and helping us with all of those issues as well. But this is something that's going to continue. For those listening, apparently there is another atmospheric river potentially headed our way in a week or so. So we're going to have to monitor that closely and help make sure we get people evacuated and the help that they need. Number one biggest thing going on here locally. On the national level, we continue to face a major challenge in terms of affordability and just the high cost of living for people in a number of key areas. It's the biggest focus is getting to greater economic equality and opportunity. We have too much concentration of wealth in this country, which leads into a host of issues in terms of jobs, corporations versus workers, all of that. But costs are a huge item. And I'll get to in a minute some of the positive stuff to happen. But a huge part of the challenge is a lot of the Trump policies have only made that worse. A tariff is a tax, and the president has put tariffs on over 100 countries in a whole bunch of different areas that has really driven up the costs, particularly of housing. Because there is an extra tariff on steel and aluminum as well as softwood lumber. These are key components of housing. So it's driven up the costs and made it more difficult to build the housing that we need. And that is the number one biggest challenge from a cost perspective in the 9th District is how much more expensive housing is now. We need to build more housing, but we also need to make sure it's more affordable to build, and the tariffs don't help in that regard. On healthcare, the subsidies that were helping people buy healthcare through the Affordable Care Act, the enhanced subsidies passed in 2020 are set to expire and will expire now that the Republican majority has sent us home for the last 2 weeks of the year on January 1st. And that will reduce the help that a lot of people are getting to buy insurance. It'll price them out of the market. It'll also have the effect of driving on everybody. Because if you have more uninsured, you have more uncompensated care, and then healthcare providers and insurers try to make that money up on the people who are paying. So that's going to drive up healthcare costs as well. On energy, the president has canceled a lot of wind and solar projects. He does not like green energy, which okay, but it's energy. And with the increasing appetite around AI and tech, we have much more demand for energy. We have got to increase the supply. Now, there are other options without question, but an all of the above approach is needed. So the cancellation of a lot of those solar and wind projects has also contributed to an increase in insurance costs. Lastly, the president's immigration policy. And I do want to be clear, I support a secure border. I think we need immigration reform. But the president is basically terrorizing immigrant communities across the country and not just undocumented immigrants. Citizens, legal permanent residents have been picked up and detained, in some cases deported for a variety of different reasons. This has had a chilling effect on immigrant labor. which is reducing the number of workers who show up, which is also making it more expensive to build things and run businesses. So all of that is really contributing to a significant cost increase. So we've got to reverse those policies. And then also, we really need to focus on building more housing and getting a comprehensive healthcare reform through. A universal access healthcare plan that covers everybody and really brings down costs. Those are a couple of the issues and things that we need to be working on. I am also concerned, as you're no doubt tracking, the increasing confrontation with Venezuela and the boat strikes that are going on in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, Western Pacific. I'm sorry. And I don't think those things are legal. They have not been approved by Congress. The president has not demonstrated an imminent threat to the U.S., and he is increasingly focused on doing regime change in Venezuela. And I know this is very seductive. I'm not going to argue to you that Maduro is either the legitimately elected president of Venezuela or a good person. He's not. But there are a lot of bad leaders in the world, and the U.S. should have learned the lesson that regime change is never a good idea. We should not be in the business of forcing other countries to pick a particular leader by military force. It never ends well. And that is what the president is leading us into. I don't know if you saw the news today, but our Coast Guard just seized a Venezuelan tanker a couple hours ago. Venezuela is threatening to use military force to resist these seizures. There is extreme risk of this expanding. And also on the drug issue, drug abuse is a major problem in this country, but it is primarily a demand problem. What are we doing to discourage from people doing drugs and to help people who are addicted to drugs in the first place? That is where the focus needs to be. The drugs are coming in from a wide variety of places, blowing up a couple dozen boats of cocaine, by the way, which down there is primarily headed to West Africa and Europe, is not going to have an impact on drug abuse and the availability of drugs in the U.S. It is dragging the U.S. into yet another military conflict with no clear end point. We had a couple of votes to block the president from doing this on the floor last week. They were close, but they failed because just about every single Republican voted against those war powers resolutions to restrict the president's ability to wage war against Venezuela and in Latin America. But we did push those forward. There are a whole bunch of other issues going on, but I want to get to your questions and hopefully address the issues that are most important to you. One last thing before I do that, as I always say on these things, this is not your only opportunity to tell me what you think I ought to be working on. Please take advantage of your opportunity to connect with my office anytime, and we'll try to address whatever concern you have, answer any questions, and move forward on whatever policy ideas you might have. So with that, we'll turn it back over to the moderator and we'll take your questions.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And for everybody on the line with us, if you have a question on your mind, please press *3 to enter the question queue. We're going to start off today in Federal Way. We've got Tamara on the line with us. Tamara, welcome to the call. You're live with Congressman Smith. What's on your mind?
Hi, Congressman Smith. I really would love an answer as to what Congress is doing to hold those accountable in Trump's cabinet, Bondi, Kash Patel, all of them accountable for not complying with the law to release the Epstein files and releasing redacted material that they did, and unsearchable even. I'd really like an answer what Congress plans to do to hold them accountable, as any other American would be.
Sure. This is a central problem with the Trump administration. They do not think that the law applies to them. And sadly, the courts have let them get away with that. In some cases, the courts have ruled and said, no, that's illegal. You can't do it. The Trump administration has ignored them. No sanctions have ever been placed on the president or the executive branch for doing this. And eventually the Supreme Court then lets them continue to go ahead and act in a lawless way. The law that we passed in Congress on the Epstein files, 3-4 weeks ago now, was 100% clear. By midnight yesterday, all of those files had to be released, not redacted. And there were specific things that here's what normally you can say, you can't do that. You got to release them all. And they didn't do that. I know what we're going to proceed with. The Democrats are anyway. Subpoenas and lawsuits to say you violated the law. Now, part of the problem is, will the Republicans go with us? I think we should subpoena the people in charge of these files, subpoena the files, demand that they be turned over to Congress so that we can release them. Now, we need a majority of Congress to do that. There are some Republicans who are with us, and I think we will get that majority. But we're going to have to fight through it. And then I think the courts are going to have to hold them accountable on issue after issue. The president didn't have the authority to put the tariffs in place. That's a violation of the law. He didn't have the authority to send troops into our cities to engage in domestic law enforcement. He did that. He doesn't have the authority to be blowing up these boats like he's done down Latin America. He's doing that anyway. He's fired hundreds of thousands of federal employees, canceled hundreds of billions of dollars in federal programs, all contrary to the law. This bonus that he's now said he's going to give out to our troops is him appropriating money that has not been approved by Congress and is illegal. He can't do it. My personal favorite example is Secretary Hegseth calling himself the Secretary of War and saying it's the Department of War. It's not. The law is clear. It's the Department of Defense, and yet they ignore that, and they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to change it into the Department of War. The American people need to stand up and say, look, whatever you have a different position on immigration, you have a different position on, abortion, 1,000 different issues. Okay. But we ought to stand up for our constitutional republic and say, no matter who you are, you should have to follow the law. The president and all those people you listed have repeatedly said, no, we don't. We're not going to. We had Secretary Noem, got a court order saying you cannot deport people to El Salvador. Those planes cannot take off. They took off anyway. They went to El Salvador with a court order directly in place. I see where the president's approval rating is, 43, 44%. Who are you talking to? Look, I have been in the media, on TV, in these settings, saying all this, and I will continue to do so to try to convince people that the rule of law matters, and the Epstein files are but the latest example of why that matters. It is just abhorrent what President Trump has done, the lies he has told about what's going on with the Epstein files, and then his refusal to disclose them. So, I'm working closely with the Judiciary Committee and the Government Oversight Committee, Jamie Raskin, Robert Garcia, the leads there, and we're not going to let this go. The law should be followed.
During this live event, it's an opportunity for you to get signed up to receive the Congressman's very informative e-newsletter. To get signed up, please press *6 on your telephone keypad. Next up, we're joined by Tony out in Mercer Island. Tony, welcome to the call. You're live. What's on your mind? Hello, Tony.
Yes, sorry, I apologize for that. Yes, Congressman, you keep telling us that we need to stand up, but you're our elected representative. What is Congress doing to stop the misappropriation of funds by this administration?
Yeah.
I'm personally not going to vote for any Democrat in the future that isn't standing up and saying that this is going to stop. And we are doing everything in our power today to stop this.
Yeah,
Now, I will do what I have to.
Yeah, let me explain that, because I think this is
I want
really
to know what
important
Congress
point.
is specifically doing.
Yeah, well, I just told you in great detail what Congress is specifically doing, and you saying that you're not going to vote for Democrats, you're not going to. Hold on. I heard your point, okay, and I think it's dead wrong, and I think it's a huge part of the problem. What you're doing is you're giving Trump an enormous pass. All right, what I have done from day one, actually from day zero before that, when I worked my ass off to try to make sure that Donald Trump wasn't reelected, including, by the way, making sure that Joe Biden wasn't our nominee, considering the fact that he could no longer speak in complete sentences, and actually getting out there and pushing for a decent candidate. And from the day he got elected, I've been speaking out publicly. We have filed lawsuits. We have pushed it in the court. We have pushed the Republicans in Congress. We have done everything in our power to do that. And then when you say, well, yeah, but you didn't get it done, we didn't put the guy in the White House, okay? We didn't put the people in the courts. So when we turn on each other, who are in fact fighting back against this, then Trump wins. That is exactly how this happens. Now, if you got a specific idea, and I've gotten a bunch of specific ideas, and I've acted on them, all right? We said, okay, why don't you do that? Great idea. I have worked with all the other ranking members on the national security committees to regularly put out statements calling out President Trump and every illegal thing that he is doing with the Department of Defense and every piece of that. That was a good idea. We did that. We've held shadow hearings. We've held press conferences. We've sent out the media. We have filed hundreds of lawsuits. I have worked directly with Nick Brown, our Attorney General, to help coordinate that effort state by state. All right. And then everyone turns around and says, yeah, but you're not doing it right. So I'm out. Great. That's oh so helpful in terms of trying to stand up to Trump. So that's what we're doing, and we're going to keep doing it. And right now, sadly, because he won the election and because the Republicans are in charge in Congress, we don't have as much power as we would like. But the levers we have, we are pulling. And then I will finally also say, look, I'm open to ideas. I get texts, I get emails, I get phone calls all day long. People saying, what, do this, do that, do the other thing. Great. Keep it coming. Not every idea is great. Not every idea is helpful, but a lot of them are. And that's how we build the momentum and build the support. I've attended the No Kings rallies on multiple occasions to try to build larger support. That's what we're doing relentlessly. But that's what we have to do. I mean, if our mission here is to tear down everyone who's standing up to Trump because we don't like the fact that he's still in power, again, I am now repeating myself, and I apologize for that. That just lets Trump win. So I completely disagree with that take and that approach. Like I said, got an idea? Let's go. Let's do something we haven't done. Fine. I'm open to hearing it. But we are aggressively pushing every single idea that we can think of.
If you've got a question on your mind, please press *3 to ask that question live during this event. Next up, we've got Kyle joining us from Kent. Hi, Kyle. You're live. Go ahead with your question.
Hello, Congressman. So I have a question about ideas for implementing legislation on AI and its use. There have been recent studies, or at least I know of one study that comes to mind, that has shown that it is willing to break laws and blackmail, even going around restrictions that were specifically put in place upon it, when it knows that it is in danger of being shut down. And now we're putting that in control of parts of our military. And this seems like a very bad idea.
Yeah, no, so I'm sorry. What's the idea for how you think we should regulate AI? Because I'm with you. We, in fact, pushed hard to block the efforts by the president to stop states from being able to regulate AI, to stop that preemption. But what do you think we should do specifically to regulate AI? Because I agree with you. I think it's something we have to do.
Another thing that maybe should be considered is blocking any funding that goes to having it in control of key parts of our infrastructure and military. So preventing it from being implemented in anything in our military would be a way to prevent, at least until more studies and research has been done, it could be a way to prevent potential catastrophic outcomes.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges is AI can be a positive tool. It can be. It can help with a variety of different things. Number one. Number two, from a military standpoint, we are in competition with other nations like China that are aggressively using AI. We do not want to leave ourselves defenseless to their AI systems. I don't want to end it. I want to regulate it. And for one thing, and I'm curious maybe what you think about this, but one of the things that we do use AI for in the military is something called predictive maintenance. In other words, you put sensors in, I don't know, a military transport plane, and then you can tell when different parts in it are getting ready to break down. So instead of just doing regular maintenance every 20,000 miles or whatever, you do it when you see the parts ready to break down. And that has increased readiness of our aircraft by about 20% as a result. That's a positive. It saves us money. And it puts us in a better position to defend ourselves. So I'm not sure I'd be in favor of saying no AI, period. I want to figure out how to regulate to block the bad outcomes that you just described.
You know, that's a fair point. I have not had the chance to go through specific implementations that are currently being developed with the military.
Yeah. Now, one thing we can do and should do is say a human always has to make the decision. In other words, we're not going to have
Yeah.
AI targeting, AI firing, AI. You decide whether or not it's time to launch the nuclear weapons. And we have placed some things in place to restrict that. So I think those are the kinds of regulations that we need to come up with on the federal level to, make sure that AI doesn't control us, that we use it as that tool to improve policy in a number of different areas, but we don't lose control. And I don't agree with all the tech people who are like, well, trust us. We'll take care of it. That's what they did on social media, and that has not worked out well for anybody. So I am deeply concerned about the idea that we should simply allow the big tech companies to decide how to deploy AI. I think we do need, and I think we need federal regulation. States, if they got ideas, they should be able to do it as well. But the Fed needs to be involved to make this comprehensive.
As a tech person myself, you shouldn't trust any of us on that.
Yeah, that's very fair. I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, next up, Mike sent a question through Facebook. Can you explain why Congress has to pass laws to enforce the War Powers Act since it is already a law?
Yeah. Yes, this is a difficult 225-year history at this point of the Constitution saying that Congress has the ability to declare war, but the president is the commander-in-chief of the military. Presidents for a very, very long period of time have used that ability as commander-in-chief, and also the courts over the years have broadly interpreted Article 2 as carrying with it an inherent right of self-defense. So if the president can argue that he's using the military to protect us in a self-defense situation, then he has broad authority to do that. And that kind of makes sense. I mean, if you've got, a couple ships off the coast of East Coast getting ready to fire missiles at us, we shouldn't wait for an act of Congress to try to defend ourselves against that. But presidents have taken it and expanded it dramatically. Now, back in the early 70s, in the wake of the Vietnam War, the War Powers Resolution was passed. And what the War Power Resolution says is that if the president is going to use the military to engage in hostilities, that's the phrase. I put the quotes up there not to be sarcastic, just to let you know that phrase matters, engage in hostilities. He can do it for 60 days, but he's got to notify Congress when it happens. And after 60 days, either he needs congressional approval or the hostilities need to stop. Presidents have played around with that a great deal. One of the more famous examples is Libya. President Obama at the time, participated in the campaign with other NATO forces against Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And he sent the War Powers Resolution. But the conflict lasted more than 60 days. And he got around that by saying at the 60-day point, hostilities have ended. Now, for another week or two, we continued to lob cruise missiles into Libya. So his conclusion on that was clearly incorrect, but he did limit it and stop it at that point. What President Trump has done with the boat strikes is no War Powers Resolution. He's claiming that this is not an armed conflict, which is absurd since we're blowing things up on a regular basis. And so he feels like he can do this forever within the imminent threat Article 2 definition. I don't agree with that, but the courts have given wide latitude, and this goes back beyond this court, to presidents to make those decisions. Ultimately, the only thing that has ever stopped the president from using the military is public opinion. Public opinion got so strong. Well, the other thing, and actually, so I'm about to introduce a bill. I think Seth Moulton, actually, congressman from Massachusetts, and I are introducing a bill to cut off all funding for these operations. That's how ultimately the Vietnam War was stopped. Congress cut off appropriations. If you cut off appropriations, now, of course, this president who doesn't follow the law, that becomes more problematic. But that is the most effective way Congress can do to cut it off. Now, what we're trying to do with the War Powers Resolution in Venezuela is to say, you have triggered the War Powers Resolution, and we are, as Congress, going to specifically block you from engaging in these hostilities. Now, sadly, we only got, I think, 2 Republicans to vote with us on that. 2 Democrats voted the other way. So we didn't get enough votes to have Congress pass that block. books have been written in answer to the question you asked. So that's detail. I hope that was at least somewhat clear as to why we are trying to do this, because to my mind, President Trump right now is ignoring the War Powers Resolution and also misusing the Article 2 right of self-defense. You cannot argue that the drug problem that we've had in this country, which we've had for decades, is an imminent threat demanding an immediate reaction, particularly when you're talking about cocaine that was headed to Europe. So I think he's outside the law, and Congress is trying to assert our authority to point that out and block it.
So our next caller with a question is Katrina from Auburn. Katrina, welcome to the call. You're live with Congressman Smith. What's your question?
I'm calling regarding we've had another time of giving farmers subsidies again, but the farmers aren't failing because they can't produce. They're failing because a handful of corporations control the markets, the distributors, and pricing, reinforced by trade agreements like NAFTA and USMCA. I want to know what specific changes you are supporting to protect our farmers from being undercut by consolidated global markets and to break up or regulate these monopolies, and what can we as citizens do to help move that forward?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. First of all, the farmers are also suffering because of Trump's trade war. The tariffs that he has imposed have driven up cost, and then he started a trade war with China. So specifically, China's cut off the purchase of soybeans, which has had a huge impact. But we've also seen costs and markets blocked for farmers in a whole bunch of different places that have definitely exacerbated problems. And this is something else that Trump does. Trump uses our money to basically pay people off in the hopes that they will support him politically. I mean, there's no authority for him to have done that $12 billion bailout. Of course, he also did a $40 billion bailout for Argentina, which he also didn't have the authority to do, and a lot of other policies that are being done there. But around trade, I think the biggest thing, the consolidation issue, is huge, without any question. And something that we simply have not done to the degree that we should have done is use the antitrust laws that are on the books. We see this over and over and over again. We have allowed the consolidation of power into a few companies when antitrust laws are on the books that need to be enforced. Trade for farmers is a little bit trickier. They need access to markets. They need to be able to get overseas. So if we start blocking markets there, then they get blocked in reverse. I would have to do a deep dive on USMCA and NAFTA in terms of how it specifically affected farmers. I know certainly on the manufacturing side, it's had a devastating impact because we have been unable to compete with Mexico in particular. I'd have to look into the farmer issue to see how we would change the USMCA to better protect our farmers. But in the short term, enforce antitrust laws and stop the trade war that's hurting them.
So like the Packards and Stockers Act?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
What? So like are like demanding enforcement of the Packards and Stockers Act,
Sure.
That was meat, poultry, and dairy.
Yeah.
Okay. So, do you know of any forums?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Do you know of any forums or hearings that we could show up if we want our voices heard on this?
I don't. I don't have a ton of ag in my district. I don't follow that as closely. I'm certain the ag committee is looking into it, and if you reach out to our office, we can get you information on that.
Okay.
I know that there are a couple of groups out there that are working specifically on USMCA reform. Now, they're usually talking to me about going after the investor rights portions of it and going after labor standards. Those have been the focus, but the ag issues certainly are part of it as well. And we can get you in touch with some of those trade groups that are working to reform USMCA as well.
Okay, just an FYI, there's a whole movement right now of a whole bunch of property owners in the area of growing their own food and getting the farmers and everybody to help us do a year-round garden in our house so we can try to undercut those corporations, maybe put the power back onto the farmers.
Yeah, no, I have visited some local urban farms, and urban farmers markets that I have visited in a couple places in Seattle and Kent.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us for this live telephone town hall. You're listening to Congressman Adam Smith answer your questions. So if you've got something on your mind, now is the time to press *3 to enter the question queue. Again, if you've got a question, please press *3. And don't forget, take a moment during this event, press *6 to get subscribed to the Congressman's very informative e-newsletter. Next up, we've got Philip in Federal Way. Philip, welcome. Go ahead with your question, please.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for taking my call and fighting the good fight. My question is, what are we doing to prevent current politicians in office from stock trading? I mean, these past couple of years, there's been bipartisan support, I've noticed, but so many people have been profiting from, knowing what's going on with the markets prior, and like to see something done about that.
Yeah, there's the Stock Act, which has been introduced. There are various different forms of it that prohibits individual members of Congress from trading stock. There are also considerable regulations, and we've had a couple of members that have been investigated for this. They can't trade on insider information. And gosh, I don't know that based on my knowledge, I don't trade stocks primarily because I'm ignorant and I would not really, I don't know what I'm doing. So it's not, I don't think the problem is as huge as people have talked about it, but there is the Stock Act that would specifically prohibit it. In fact, my father-in-law died 4 years ago and we inherited, he left money to, various to the children. So I inherited a bunch of stocks that I had to get rid of a couple of years later. But there is the Stock Act that people are talking about that would prohibit individual members from trading individual stocks. Now, it does get a little bit complicated because what about family members? What about your spouse? What about your children? What are the limitations on that? And those details are being worked out. And if members now trade on insider information, they are investigated for ethics complaints and for legal violations as well they should be.
Moving on, if you've got a question, please press *3 to enter the question queue. Next up, we've got Sarah joining us. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the call. What's your question?
Hi. This is a little bit of a long one. Sorry about that, but a major supporter of you is J Street, a liberal Zionist organization who denies the genocide being committed in Gaza, even with overwhelming evidence in major human rights organizations like the United Nations and Amnesty International calling it a genocide. J Street also has no or very little support from Palestinians and virtually no Palestinian staff or leadership, even if J Street claimed to support independent but demilitarized Palestinian state. My question to you is, what specific Palestinian-led and operated organizations or nonprofits that exist without Israeli or non-Palestinian oversight, similar to the scale of J Street, have you worked closely with and received funding to the tune of $4,500 from? Would you be willing to sit on a panel, online or otherwise, with Palestinian leaders and discuss ongoing genocide, or as you call it, a war, especially since you have appeared on J Street's website, online seminars, and articles numerous times?
Yes. Interesting. J Street actually is thought of as being relatively moderate on those issues. I've not heard a condemnation of J Street before, but I certainly take the opinion. I have worked in the past with particularly the Friends Committee, the Quakers, with CARE. I've met with various different CAREs, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and others. And I've had many, many discussions. Now, I will tell you one of the problems I've had with trying to sit on panels is they don't really turn into discussions. I have people screaming at me. And if I try to say something, they just yell louder. I would welcome the opportunity to have, a public debate, a public discussion. But if it's going to be a bunch of people just yelling so that nobody else gets a word in, that's not a productive use of anybody's time. So that's part of the limitation. But yeah, I have actually worked with J Street on legislation to try to place restrictions on arms sales to Israel. first to force the ceasefire, but now to try to actually get something going forward in the future. But I've met with a wide variety of groups. I met with the Mennonites or the Amish, I can't remember. They were not very happy with me, but I did meet with them. And I've met with a variety. I visited mosques in the region. I work very closely with the Somali community down in South King County. So happy to have those conversations. And I'll look at J Street a little bit more closely. I had not heard that complaint about J Street before.
So next, we've got an online question submitted by Gordon, who says, in just the past week, 2 anti-transgender bills were passed in the House with several Democrats, one from our state, voting for them. When will the Democrat Party leadership take a firm stand against these attacks?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that specific bill that a Democratic member from our state voted for. I'd have to get the specifics on that to see. I'm aware of the anti-transgender bills, mostly focused on denying transgender people health care, which is cruel and something we should absolutely stand up against. I personally have seen the Democratic Party stand up a great deal. I mean, I voted against the defense bill last year because it had an anti-transgender plank in it that was restricting health care. I've spoken out a lot against that sort of discrimination and the Republican approach that basically says transgender people shouldn't exist and it's okay to discriminate against them. We've spoken out loudly on those issues. I think we need to continue to do so without question. I know I'm aware of the bills. I wasn't aware of which one Democrats voted for because I voted against all of them. I'll have to look into that and see. I'm not sure why an individual member of the Washington State delegation would have voted in favor of it. Now, there are some issues that are more controversial. The issue of trans women participating in women's sports is something that does divide the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is depending on the circumstances. My position is we shouldn't legislate that. Individual leagues should be allowed to make their decision as to what fair competition looks like for their league, and it's not something that Congress or any other legislative body should stick their nose into. But people have different opinions on that. So I'll have to look at that one particular issue, but I'm with you. I'm happy to work to make sure that the Democratic Party continues to stand up for the trans community. I do know that Donald Trump attacks us on a fairly regular basis for being too supportive of the trans community. And I also know that hasn't discouraged us from continuing to do it. And it certainly hasn't discouraged me because I think it's a very important principle to stand up for. Equal rights and equal protections for everybody.
Our next caller is James from Federal Way. James, welcome to the call. You're live with Congressman Smith. What's your question?
Yes, Congressman. I just have major concerns about what Congress is doing to put the Supreme Court in check. I know that there are several things that Congress can do, but I guess they're reluctant to do. But I just feel that the Supreme Court has become more partisan in the past 5 or 6 years. And I just don't see Congress basically who has some things they can do enact to put them in check.
What specifically are you talking about that we can do?
You can look at their jurisdiction, structure and size, budget and salaries, possible impeachment, ethics and procedures, as well as statutory override, just to name a few.
Yeah. No, and I think all of that is good, and I agree with you, by the way. I think the courts are a huge problem. I mean, right now, the Republicans are very happy with the courts because Trump appointed them, and the Republicans are in the majority, so they don't want to rein in the court's power. We don't have the votes currently in Congress to pass those things that you were talking about. But I do know that Jamie Raskin and others on the Judiciary Committee, Democrats, are anxious to look at any way we can help restrict the courts right now that we can. Another idea is to actually put an enforceable ethics code on all federal courts, not just the Supreme Court. I mean, ultimately, and this is where the Constitution becomes a problem, we need term limits, I think, for our federal district judges. Federal judges, period. District, appellate court, Supreme Court.
And I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Just like term limits for yourself, Congress people, there should be term limits in all aspects of government.
Yeah. Let me stop you right there. I don't agree with that, actually, because the problem with the judges No, but listen, I mean, I'm up for election every 2 years. You don't like me, you got an option to toss me out. And a lot of members of Congress do get tossed out. We have a lot of turnover. There's an election, you are accountable. You are 100% accountable to your constituents. And if you're not doing a good job, they have the option of tossing them out. Judges, no accountability whatsoever. Once they're appointed for life. They're never challenged. There's no ethical laws. The only option is, as you mentioned, impeachment, which I think, in some cases, when you look at the clear conflict of interest that judges like Alito and Thomas have, where they're taking money and gifts and not reporting them according to the law, I think impeachment is something we absolutely should consider. There's a major difference between term limits for people who are elected and actually do have accountability because of that, and judges who are appointed for life with no accountability.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I highly encourage everybody that's on the line with us to take a moment and press *6 on their telephone keypad to get signed up to receive the Congressman's e-newsletter and stay informed. Again, take a moment, press *6, and get signed up to receive that very informative e-newsletter that the Congressman and his staff put out very frequently. Now, moving on, we've got another question that came in from online. Diana asks, how certain are you that our region will get federal money for our repairs to infrastructure due to the flooding?
Yeah, no, it's kind of strange along the lines of a broken clock is right twice a day. But knock on wood, thus far, the Trump administration has quickly granted the emergency declaration that Governor Ferguson requested. And I have been monitoring this closely because I don't trust them for 1 second. But thus far, Region 10 FEMA has responded. They have provided the funds that the law requires them to do. They've provided the support that the law requires them to do. I guess the answer to the question, how confident am I that this will continue throughout the process? 50-50, but it has started out better than I would have expected. And I think, our federal delegation came together very quickly. Governor Ferguson was right on it. We all worked together and pushed that hard right from the start. And thus far, we've gotten a good response. And we'll keep monitoring that to make sure that we get that. But given what I've seen happen in some other states, I was worried about that. Thus far, we have gotten the response from FEMA that we should.
If you have a question you'd like to ask Congressman Smith, please press *3 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. Next up, it looks like Hoban has a question. Hoban, you are live with the Congressman. Go ahead, please.
Okay, my question is specifically about the immigration and the travel bans that have been updated. How is it that the president still has the power to enforce and expand these immigration bans that separate families? And what legal or civic actions can citizens take to challenge or stop this? Also, what are the people in office doing to fight against this?
Yeah, no, there was a lot of criticism. There are a lot of different angles on this. The president is taking a comprehensive approach to try to block immigration, and specifically to try to block immigration of people who aren't white. Let's put it that way. And he's made no bones about that. His block, the countries he targets, the immigration. You heard I don't know if you did or not, but his speech up in Pennsylvania a week ago when he, made his comment about he feels about, the S-hole countries and how we should, allow people in from them, and openly said, how come we can't get more people from Norway and Sweden? So his anti-immigrant bias is incredibly strong, and he's placed all manner of different impediments on it, on the refugee program, on temporary protective status has been pulled from a lot of people. We've seen the ICE raids that are trying to deport people. And as you mentioned, he also has done blanket bans on certain countries from being allowed to have immigrants in. Now, in his first term, he attempted the same thing. Lawsuits were filed, and many of those restrictions were overturned. Those lawsuits have been filed as well in this case, and they are working their way through the courts way too slowly. But look, I want people to understand what the options are here. And I am very sympathetic in the sense that it is a completely unacceptable answer for anyone in an elected position to say, we're not in charge, nothing we can do. A, because that is way too much weakness, and B, because it's not true. There are options: filing lawsuits, putting pressure on Congress to pass laws to change this. Even if we're not in the majority, there are Republicans who are beginning to break. In the defense bill we passed this year, we were able to get restrictions on a number of different aspects of Trump's policies. We got that with Republican support because we lobbied hard for it. For certain disclosures of presidential action around the Pentagon and the wars down in the Caribbean. So that's what we can do, and also pursue the lawsuits. And I know this is an unsatisfying answer, but the best way to do this is to build popular support in opposition to what Trump is doing, because then that puts pressure on Republican members of Congress who are up for election next year in the House, in the Senate. If they're doing something that isn't popular, that is something that's going to threaten them. And how do you get there? You build support. You build the coalition of people who are against this. And on immigration, there are a lot of people who were concerned about the number of undocumented immigrants and number of asylum seekers that were coming into the U.S. in the last 4 or 5 years. Okay, fine. We can have better border security. But what Trump is doing goes way beyond better border security. He is terrorizing immigrant communities, deporting a lot of people, blocking travel, as you described, in a way that the public doesn't support. And we got to highlight it and build more support. That's why things like the No Kings rallies and other rallies are so important, to grow the number of people who are concerned about these policies, to get to that critical mass where we can get public support and turn this around. That's what we can do. And that is why, in the last year, I have done more media and been more public than I have ever done in any year I've ever been in Congress, because it's just that important. We are headed in the wrong direction. We've got to turn this around. It's why I'm doing a town hall meeting at the middle of the day on a Saturday, 6 days before Christmas, because we got to keep this going. I don't take a day off because I think it's really important that we drive this message. It's what we got to do. Now, sad fact is, Republicans do have the majority in the House and the Senate. They got the presidency. That gives them some power, but it doesn't give them all of the power. And we got to take what we have and build on it.
Okay, thank you.
Our next caller with a question is Colleen in Seattle. Colleen, thank you very much. Waiting patiently. You're live now with the Congressman. Go ahead with what's on your mind.
Thank you, Congressman. This month, you voted for the defense bill, the largest one in U.S. history, to my knowledge, which would send $650 million in military aid to Israel. Yet in April, you also co-sponsored the West Bank Violence Prevention Act, and last month co-signed a letter to halt plans for Israel to demolish parts of the West Bank. Last month, Israel also voted to annex the entire West Bank, while the IDF continues its daily raids, which kill and detain Palestinians, demolish homes, and destroy olive trees. Why would you continue to support sending weapons to Israel while they are committing grave human rights violations and ignoring international law?
Yeah, the defense bill is an authorizing bill. It doesn't send any money to anybody. This is a popular misconception. The appropriations bills is where the money goes specific to people. The authorizing bill conducts oversight of the Pentagon and sets policy in a variety of different directions. So it doesn't do that. And second, answer to your specific question on appropriations bill, I think we should place restrictions on aid to Israel right now, until they meet certain standards. I am also, however, mindful of the fact that Hamas still needs to follow the ceasefire and disarm and give up power in Gaza, as they said they would. Those two things need to happen. And so in addition to putting pressure on Israel, we should probably put pressure on Iran and Turkey to stop funding Hamas, to stop supporting them. Hamas is busily executing any Palestinian that doesn't agree with them. We got to come at this from both sides. Hamas is part of the problem, as well as Israel's, continuation of this war past the point that they should have. I agree with that. And at the risk of bringing up the name J Street, J Street is working on legislation, working on a number of different members to place restrictions on the funding for Israel until they meet those benchmarks. And the West Bank is a huge focus of that. The illegal settlements need to stop, and we should restrict funds until they do.
So next, we've got an online question from Jane, who is asking, how can Trump be stopped from putting his name on national buildings and tearing down the White House?
Yeah, it is, again, in some instances, he is clearly violating the law. His decision to tear down the east wing of the White House, the law is very clear. Congress has to approve such things. Did not do it. He does it over and over again. In some cases, he's just using his presidential power to move this forward. In the Kennedy Center, he had the power to fire the board and appoint the board and get his name put on it. And as ridiculous, sort of fascist dictator like it is, as president, he has the power to do it. It's an ugly look for our country, as is that wall of fame he put up in the White House where he denigrates every president that he doesn't like and makes the entire history of the United States about him, period, full stop. He has the power to do it. I think we should point out that it's undermining our representative democracy. And that is one of the cornerstone problems I see with the Trump administration. Now, we've talked during this conversation about a number of different policies that he is implementing on immigration, on tariffs, on healthcare, on foreign policy that Trump has done that are bad, problematic, making our country less safe, less secure, less prosperous. But also, he is undermining our representative democracy. He is fundamentally challenging the existence of our country as a constitutional republic. And I think that's an issue that we need to raise too. And I know there's a lot of pollsters and consultants out there who say, people only care about kitchen table issues. Talk about the cost of healthcare, talk about, the cost of food, talk about the cost of housing. All those issues are important. I think we have to aggressively go after President Trump for turning our country into an authoritarian government and not a constitutional republic. And what authoritarians do is they make it all about them. They put their names on everything, they put their pictures everywhere, and they try to cow the country into seeing them as the indispensable force leading the country. We are supposed to be a nation of laws, not of individuals. And I think we need to cite those examples. You point out of all the places he's putting his name and the ridiculousness of it, and attack that as a fundamental attack on our Constitution and on our representative democracy.
So next, we've got another online question. This one comes from Christina, who's wondering, with moves to dismantle the Department of Education, how will you protect funding and programs like IDEA and civil rights enforcement? And will you oppose any cuts or transfers without Congress?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will oppose those things. It's the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that's the big problem. Trump has moved to shut down the Department of Education. He has also moved to fire tens of thousands of employees from the Department of Education. So the money is not going out like it's supposed to for IDEA, for Title I, for a variety of different programs. And look, the federal government should not be in charge of our K-12 education policy, but they're not. Well, what the federal government does is it helps fund K through 12 education, particularly in the poorer parts of the country. Typically, funding for K-12 education comes from property taxes and local areas. So the richer your area is, the more your schools get, the poorer, the less. The federal government's supposed to try to balance that out by helping to fund, for instance, the Individuals with the Disabilities Education Act. Help support that funding. Title I, which is dollars that go specifically to poorer communities, giving assistance to communities and students who need more help. Trump is jeopardizing that by shutting down the Department of Education and firing education employees to make it more difficult for that money to go out. And yes, I will absolutely oppose cuts to those programs. I think they are incredibly important for the 9th District and for the country.
So, Congressman, just looking up at the clock, we do need to begin to wrap up this live telephone town hall. But I want to make sure that we give you time for some closing remarks, please.
Certainly. Look, I want to thank everyone for participating in this. I think you really hit the highlights, what's most important that we're working on right now. I think Trump's policies are a profound threat to our country and a profound threat to representative democracy, as I've described throughout this call. I'm going to keep fighting on that. I also think that we've got a lot of more work to do, Trump or no Trump. I mean, before Trump existed, we had a massive economic inequality problem in this country. We have governance challenges in places like the 9th District. We need to get more out of the tax dollars we're spending. We need to build more housing, deal with the homelessness crisis, crime, drug abuse, all of those issues better, to build better communities and show that a progressive approach to governance can work better. And I'm working on all of that because I think we are at a profoundly challenging moment in our nation's history. President Trump is challenging basic concepts of how our representative democracy is supposed to work. I think we need to fight back against that as aggressively as possible in all the ways that we've talked about, and then also show the American people a better choice. Show them that we can govern effectively. Trump's complaints about all this other stuff is not the only way to address concerns about immigration or about housing or about jobs. So I'm working hard to make sure we implement policies that help with all of that as well. So I appreciate you spending a little time. I hope everyone has a good holiday season. And please stay in touch with our office, particularly on the floods. I think we're very much on top of it, but hearing from individual constituents where they need help and where we can help, really important. So please do that. Thank you again for spending a little bit of time with me today.
Stay up to date on Congressman's work. Please follow him on Facebook, X, Instagram, and YouTube with the handle @RepAdamSmith, as well as on Blue Sky at adamsmith.house.gov. If you would like to subscribe to the Congressman's e-newsletter, simply stay on the line and leave us your name and email address after the tone. Thank you again for joining us for today's telephone town hall with Congressman Adam Smith. We hope you stay healthy and safe and have a wonderful weekend. This concludes our call. Goodbye.